Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be listening to some truly terrifying cryptid stories. I hope that you enjoy. I would also like to extend a thank you to Daughter of Darkness, a relatively new narration channel, who is joining us in tonight's video. If you like her narrations, please be sure to check out her channel by subscribing and perhaps listening to some of her videos when you're done here. I hope you enjoy. Link in the description and at the end of the video as always. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Back in 2005, I was in a band that toured the country in a 15-passenger van with a trailer. We were on our way from Columbus, Ohio to Erie. The show had been cancelled in Ohio due to a power outage, so we decided to get on the road early, as we had a friend in Erie who was taking us in for the night. While on the I-80 about 25 minutes outside of Erie, I'll never forget this moment for the rest of my life. We were all pretty much alert and actively having a conversation. There were 8 of us in total in the van, when the driver and passenger both shouted simultaneously, "What the hell is that?" I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I was sitting with my back against the window and I didn't see anything, but we heard a whooshing noise as if something flew over the van. My friend who was sitting next to me looked like he'd just seen a ghost. We wound up pulling over on the side of the road because everyone was freaking out, thinking we hit something, but nothing was found. Both the passenger and the driver said they saw a tall black figure lunge at the van from the shoulder of the left lane. My friend who was sitting next to me said the same thing. No, I don't think they're all playing a hoax on the unknowing members, because I know these guys and they were scared out their minds. We arrived at our destination, and the house that we were staying at's power was also out. The next day, we inspected the van in daylight and noticed there were streak marks across the roof of the van. Our van was white and also very dirty due to touring the entire country. Still to this day, we don't know what we witnessed. We've done some search on it and similar reports have happened in and around the same area. I was reading the book The Mothman Prophecies around the time of the tour as well, and I'm quite convinced that we had an encounter with the unexplained.
When I was a kid, maybe 5 years old, my country had a civil war. I lived in the capital, but even there, it was mandatory for the city to shut off all the power at night. I'm guessing because it was easier for them to track any possible attacks that way. Anyway, they shut off the power that night, and, as usual, my cousin and sister lit a candle and took me to my parents' room to play. They're both 4 years older than me, so they were old enough to recognize if there was any danger, and they'd been told what to do if anything happened. We were to take shelter under the bed. I had a large Labrador dog named Peggy, who had just had puppies and was super protective of both them and us. She slept in the backyard, and any little noise or movement, she would start barking to protect us. That night, however, was different. We were in the room just playing. I remember my cousin was on top of the bed, my sister was next to the window, and I was standing on the floor next to the bed in between both of them. Suddenly, my cousin asked if we could see that thing on the patio. My sister and I looked, but we couldn't see anything. But then, we saw it. The best way I can describe it is there was no outline to the body. I couldn't see anything except for 2 eyes that were elongated upside-down triangles and a line resembling a mouth. And it looked like it was made of TV static. It was glowing green and blue and maybe 5 feet tall. As it got closer to the window, it kind of bent down and smiled at my sister. By smiling, I mean the line that resembled the mouth got bigger. I'm getting goosebumps just writing this. And what was my dog doing? She was always so protective of us, yet now she didn't make a single sound. That thing was standing right outside my window, and I froze. It made eye contact with all three of us. I could see it moving its eyes from person to person, just staring. There was no communication, telepathically or otherwise. What was it? My cousin eventually snapped out of it and grabbed my sister and me, and we ran out of the room to go tell my parents. My dad went outside but found nothing. Mind you, we were at war. So what was this thing? What could be so stupid as to go into someone's backyard with a big dog in a country at war at night and just stare at us? It almost looked like a hologram. It was glowing. I could see little dots glowing in its eyes and mouth. After that, I could no longer sleep facing the window. I would hide under the blankets for years, and the weather here is always around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so I would almost die every night, unable to breathe under that blanket, yet too afraid to come out and open a window. I never felt any threat, but it was just so bizarre. I've never seen it since then, and I'm 33 now. I've looked and researched as much as possible to see if anyone else has seen anything like it. If you have, please contact me. I have to figure out what this thing was, or why it was there.
I live in a somewhat medium-sized town, with a mix of cities and backwoods areas nearby. The bus stop I use has a good mix. It has buildings nearby, while also having entry to the nearby surrounding woods. One morning I was waiting in the bus, when I realized it was late that morning. I got annoyed and decided since I was bored, I would go into this little walkway/trail that was nearby. Not all the way, just enough to where I could be secluded by the trees. After a while of checking my phone, I heard the bus stop. At the stop, a little way down from mine. I headed back to the stop, and when I got there, I got a fight or flight response that was very intense, like if a weapon had just been shot off. I turned around to see this crouching creature coming out of the secluded area. It was just pitch black. Arms about the size of half its body. Its head looked like an eraser. The most terrifying part of it was the creature's size. It was easily the size of a telephone or lamp pole. It towered over me and everything around it. Its hands were large and its fingers were thick and were about the size of half my arm. I don't know if I should run because I knew this thing would catch me in a matter of steps. Some time passed while it climbed out of the walkway and stood looking at me. Then the bus pulled up and opened its doors. I looked at the bus and back at the creature, but it was gone, just vanished. I looked at the bus driver and his face was normal, so I assumed he hadn't seen anything. I got on the bus and silently cried for a few minutes. I don't know if this is correlated or if just my brain, but that night I had a dream where the exact same thing happened, except the bus didn't show up, and as you can imagine, things didn't go all that well for me for the rest of the dream. My friends called it the Line Man, but I don't care about naming it. I've been back to the bus stop over the course of a week, and every time I was watching the trees in the walkway, but never saw it. I'm still scared of going back to that bus stop.
I recently had an experience that I'm just not sure about. I tried explaining it to my sister, but I can't even put it into words. I don't want people to think I'm crazy, but I feel like I am crazy when I discuss it, but I have to tell somebody who might understand. So recently I went on a bit of a road trip and I visited a bunch of places in the Southwest, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and Southern California. I stopped at a park in Colorado that I hadn't initially planned to go to, a place well known for its Native American history, and it was absolutely beautiful. Honestly, it was amazing and humbling to see the history of the people there. It made me realize that there is so much more about American history than the rather Eurocentric view of colonialism that I was taught. Given that it was November and very off-season, half the park was not accessible and attendance was minimal. There were other people, but overall, it was very quiet. I had been exploring some ruins atop a mesa, taking photos, one huge multi-room building, and not far away, another building with a large kiva in the middle. On the southern side of building number 2 was a solstice carving on the wall. I was walking around the smaller building, taking photos, as there was a couple walking in the larger one, and I was enjoying the quiet of being alone. Eventually the couple left, and I was alone. It's hard to describe exactly how I felt and how everything went down, but I'll try. It was a pretty nice day. The temperatures were in the upper 50s. I'm from the Midwest, so that's still shorts weather to me. There were some small clouds, a pleasant breeze, a few birds, and more than a few chipmunks running around. As I walked around the solstice building, everything became very still. Like the wind stopped, the animals went silent. It was so weird. Then there was a large dark cloud that appeared out of nowhere and just hung there. There was also a heaviness in the air all over, and there was the smell of what I thought was a dead animal. It was a smell of rotting meat. The walls in the solstice building were only about 2 feet high. As I reached the wall, I noticed that on top of it there was a piece of pottery, and I swear that pottery had not been there before, and it wasn't in any of that first set of photos that I took. It was a large, broken piece of pottery, but now that I think back, it was really clean. The black and white colors were very clear. I went and picked it up to get a closer look, and it was really beautiful. It had a kind of stair pattern, and then an angled set of lines. Beautiful. But it felt weird, oddly heavy for its size. I wanted to keep it, and I just kept staring at it for what felt like forever. It's hard to describe how I felt, but time stood still, and all I wanted was that pottery. Even now, thinking about it, I still get a weird sense of longing for it. As I held it in my hands, everything just went silent and heavy, and that dead, rotting meat smell was just so strong. Suddenly, this huge raven appeared out of nowhere. Just 5 feet away from me was the largest bird that I have ever seen in the wild. This raven just cawed and flapped its wings, and I kind of snapped back into reality. Honestly, this raven was bigger than a condor. Its body was easily 3 feet tall, and its wingspan was massive. I put the pottery piece back on the wall, and I just looked at the bird, and the bird looked back at me. Then I turned and walked away, and just like that, the dark cloud blew away. The wind returned, the bird started chirping, and the dead flesh smell was gone. Actually, the smell all but vanished when the raven first appeared. I got 10 steps away from where I had been standing, just around the corner from the solstice ruins, and I turned around to look for the raven, but it was gone. I hadn't heard it flap its wings and fly away, and I didn't see anything in the sky. It was just gone, and the piece of pottery was no longer on the wall. I went back to my car and headed for the visitors center. Besides being totally freaked out by what had just happened, it was also getting late in the day, and I had a fair bit of driving to do to get to my next stop in Arizona. I had a good 35-minute drive back to the park entrance to reflect on what happened to me and how strange I felt. Honestly, it felt like I had downed a bunch of Benadryl. I was so foggy, right up until the raven showed up. Even now, I just really can't explain how I felt. When I got to the visitor center, I was the only person there besides the employees. In the gift shop, I was buying a mug, and I was talking to the park ranger and the cashier, who was an older Native American woman, about how awesome the park was and how I wished I had learned more about their cultures in school. When I told them about the piece of pottery, I also said something like, "Oh yeah, up by the far view sites there's a dead animal. When the wind dies down, you can smell it." The park ranger and the cashier kind of quickly looked at each other, then back at me. The cashier asked if the smell came before the pottery piece, and I said, "Yeah, the wind stopped and the animals were all quiet." And I basically told them everything, except I didn't tell them how much I wanted to take the pottery home. I didn't want to sound crazy or admit that I wanted to steal an artifact from a national park. But I did tell them how heavy everything got, how silent and still, and they just looked at each other a few times and kept quiet. Until I told them about the huge raven that appeared. At that, the cashier let out a little gasp. When I finished my story, they had a few questions about the timing of things. They wanted to know how long everything lasted and in what order it happened. They also asked me to describe the pottery, and all of a sudden, the cashier asked, "Would you like some tea?" I love tea, so I said, "Actually, that sounds wonderful. Thank you." As she went to get some hot tea, the ranger and I walked back to the employee break room. She asked where I was from and what I knew about the area. I told her how truly minimal my knowledge is about the various Native American cultures, even those closer to my Midwestern home. When the cashier returned, she handed me a cup of sage tea, and she asked if I was honest about everything that happened. I was really confused but said, "Yeah." So she told me to drink. The tea tasted like some no-salt vegetable broth. As I drank, they told me about what they thought I had encountered. Apparently, they had heard a few different stories concerning skinwalker activity throughout the year, but none where someone saw a raven, and that's why they were telling me this. The cashier then told me about skinwalkers and how sometimes they curse objects to lure in unsuspecting people. She also said that the fact that the raven appeared and removed whatever enchantments I felt was very important. That someone greater than us was watching out for me in that moment. Because even though skinwalkers can choose many different animal forms, they would never appear as a raven due to the spiritual importance of these birds. Something about how they carry messages from beyond our reality on their midnight wings. And if the raven appeared to me, they could share certain information with me that they could never share with anyone else. She told me that the sage tea would help to cleanse me of any remnants of the skinwalker's tricks, and also suggested that I see a shaman. I had already finished the tea and was getting a little freaked out, but oddly, I felt much more calm hearing her speak. I thanked them and I tried not to run to my car, but walked very quickly and left. That night, and a night or two later, I had some very vivid dreams, and I can't remember a thing about them, which is weird. I usually remember my dreams when I wake up, at least long enough to write them down. But these dreams, even though they woke me up, I can't remember them. I don't know what really happened or if they were pulling my leg, but once I got home and I really started looking into things, I kind of feel, I don't know. I feel like I'm crazy because I can't rationalize what happened. Even when writing this, I realize how crazy this all sounds, and I still can't fully describe how I felt and how weird everything got. It's just too hard to put into words. but I had to share this with people who might understand and have their own insights.
Last night, I was playing video games at 1:30 in the morning when I noticed that my dogs started scratching at the door to get in. They usually do that when the temperature isn't right. We live in Mexico, by the way. And I went to open the door, but when I did, they ran scared into my room. The three of them were shaking and hiding under the bed. It was so unexpected because they'd never done that, and I was really freaking out because I knew for a fact that something had scared them. We have a gym in our house, but it's in a room that isn't connected to the house itself. Even before going into the gym, I noticed something strange because the door was open, and we never leave the door open so the dogs can't get in. I also noticed that the gym light was turned off, so my first assumption was that someone was breaking into the house, but I wanted to check. When I opened the gym door, I saw something that still gives me chills. I saw red eyes in the back of the gym, and an enormous dark silhouette that was even noticeable in the absolute darkness. It was very tall, and I felt like evil incarnate was right there in front of me. I ran back to the main house, and I swear I heard something running behind me that sounded like horseshoes. I entered my room, locked the door, and heard nothing else that night. In the morning I checked, and there was nothing strange in the gym at all. I know it's not a dream, because my dogs are still unable to go anywhere near that door. I don't think I want to use that gym anymore.
Near the town of Boone, North Carolina, there's a little town called Valley Crucis, or Valley of the Cross, so named for the three streams that meet in the center of the village, forming a rough cross. There exists an old legend about two young men who encountered what is known locally as the demon dog of Valley Crucis. Their story is of an otherworldly pursuit of their vehicle by a phantom canine who appeared from behind the old stone church on the outskirts of town, St. John's Episcopal. When I was a child, my family would vacation outside of Valley Crucis every winter. On 2 such trips, I had an encounter with that very creature. The following is the account of my first experience. I was 10 years old and excited for another winter vacation in our family mountain house. We didn't own it, but with my grandma and all the family on my dad's side, we could afford to rent it once a year. The house is located outside of Valley Crucis, off of Old 194. To get to the access road, you have to drive right past St. John's Episcopal and the cemetery, the supposed stalking ground of the demon dog. I wouldn't learn of this legend until I was in college. For 8 years, I had no idea that I wasn't the only one to see it. The first year we ever rented that house, we got almost 2 feet of snow. But in the years since, it's been disappointing by comparison. This year was supposed to be the big one, and the snowfall was scheduled to hit during our vacation week. As you might guess, my cousins and myself were really excited to learn that there would be ample snow coming up. But first we had to stock up. Everyone needs milk and sandwiches, right? That night, as it was getting dark and the first flakes were starting to fall, it was decided that a grocery run was needed. My uncle volunteered to drive to nearby Boone and pick up everything. I asked to go too because he's my favorite uncle. He's a funny guy, always quick with a dad joke or a prank. I figured if nothing else, I'd get a good laugh out of sharing the trip with him. We drove down the gravel road and eventually hit 194, took a left, and started heading towards the main valley. Now fully dark, we passed St. John's Episcopal, the old stone church sitting quaintly among the dark woods. I can't say how far past the church we made it before it unleashed itself upon us, with every pun intended. I didn't notice a thing, being a kid and all. Not at first, anyway. The first thing I did notice was my uncle adjusting and persistently checking the rearview mirror. The expression on his face was concerned, if not dire. Something was not right. We continued on our way, and I noticed our speed increasing to a level not quite safe for such a mountainous area. We were probably doing 60 miles an hour down a hairpin lane. About the time I realized that something was wrong, I looked at my uncle. I'd never seen real fright in a grown man's face until then. He was looking in that rearview mirror as much as he was at the road. I turned to look. Behind the truck was a pair of eyes. Red, but not like glowing red. They were burgundy, without any illumination. It's not something easily explained with language. It was like two smoldering embers burning, and they locked me in, hypnotizing me. I came to a few seconds later, though it could have been an eternity and a half in my mind. Time had done something wrong. There was a knocking right on the back window of the cab of his truck. Whatever had been following us was now in the truck bed. I knew it. He knew it. I felt the pickup lurch as he gunned the throttle. I was holding out hope that it was a prank, that my other uncle was the one cackling in the back of the truck, and that this was a sick joke I just wasn't ready for. But his face suggested otherwise. Then I heard the knock on my window. Whatever it was now essentially floating beside us at dangerous speeds for such a road. It was tapping on my window, beating on it. I looked over at my uncle as he looked past me to see whatever lay beyond. He told me not to look. Whatever happens, he said, do not look out that window. I listened to him and didn't look. It would be years before I learned what he saw. 4 years, to be exact. I was 14 when I had my second encounter with the demon dog of Valley Crucis. On that vacation, I was allowed to bring a friend along, as was my sister, considering our older cousins were away at school and we had extra room in the mountain house. My friend Stephen is still my best friend, even though we're now grown men. We understand each other on an almost telepathic level. We were enjoying another snowy trip to the lodge, and we were snowboarding like we were possessed. We were in hog heaven as far as we were concerned. One afternoon, we all piled into my grandmother's van. It was a touring van, somewhere between a Honda Odyssey and a full-blown RV. We picked our way down the gravel road and onto Old 194. We crossed through Valley Crucis and on to Boone, North Carolina. The whole family was going to eat at the Daniel Boone Inn. We left the restaurant around 8:45 and began the trip back to the house. I was in the back with my friend. Not the back seat, just the back cargo area of the van. Our main view was out the back window. In the back passenger seats were my little sister and her friend. Up front, Mom, Dad, Aunt, and Uncle. My uncle was driving. The rest of the crowd had gone ahead in a smaller car and were not in sight. We were 3/4 of the way home and had just passed St. John's Episcopal Church when the van just stopped. It seemed the entire engine just died. But I wasn't fooled. I'd seen this trick before. My uncle loved to stop in a desolate area and pretend that we were stranded. He'd get out, look around like he was confused, then he'd say, "Well, kids, it looks like we're stuck here." My uncle didn't laugh at our terror and restart the van. He just sat there and looked at my dad. The look on his face was not jovial. It didn't seem like a joke this time. But I played along, still not sure that it wasn't a joke. I nudged my friend with my elbow and gestured my head towards my sister and her friend, as if to say, "Watch this, it'll be funny." But it wasn't funny. When I nudged him, he had no response. He had his eyes fixed on the back window. It was as if he were in a trance. Then I saw it too. Behind the vehicle, just beyond the light from the brakes, there was this thing. That's the only thing I can call it. It had the head of a large black wolf. The body was of a man almost, though the arms were far too long, and it was standing upright on two muscular legs. It just didn't make any sense. But whatever it was, it had my friend deadlocked through the eyes, and he was absolutely terrified. About that time, my mother saw it too. At least I think she did. To this day, she won't talk about it. All I heard was her screaming at my uncle to start the car and move. The van rumbled to life a few seconds later. We started back down the road towards home. All the while, Stephen and I were looking out the back window. What we saw makes me shudder to this day. The creature dropped down and was running behind the vehicle on unnatural fours. The way it ran was so messed up, I still lose sleep thinking about it. It was so smooth and graceful, but I'll never forget how disturbing it was in motion. Nothing natural should move that way. Watching it run locked me in too, and everything around just kind of melted away. The worst part was that we couldn't lose it. We were doing an easy 60 miles an hour on this desolate highway, but it was right there behind us, right behind the van. Its face was like an exaggerated cartoon character of a wolf, but all too real. It was like something out of a nightmare. What I remember most were the eyes, like two cigar embers, but with yellow irises, unmoving, and a deep dark black pupil in the center of each hellish orb. But they were hypnotic. I guess maybe the fear overwhelmed me, because the next day I woke up in my bed in the mountain house. It was morning, and I have no memory of how I got there. To this day, it takes Stephen quite a few drinks to discuss this, and even then, he can't have a serious conversation about it. I think he hides behind humor. But I know he remembers just as well as I do. It would be well over 10 years before I brought the experience up to my family. It seems a mighty touchy subject, but I did manage to talk to my uncle about it. What he saw out that vehicle window the night so many years ago when I was 10 had been the exact same creature I saw behind the van a few years later. We both know what we saw, even though my mom says it was just a large wolf. It wasn't just a wolf. My advice? Stay out of the valley at night.
I live on the edge of a forest known as Cannock Chase. A specific area of it is known as Cavern Woods, which has been documented in news for alien sightings, pigman sightings, and was the original black-eyed children sighting spot. So you could say that it's a hotbed of paranormal activity. Since moving there 4 years ago, I have been seeing some kind of entity. This thing stalks the boundaries of the woods, usually black and shadowy, with a skeletal head that resembles a deer skull with antlers, similar looking to the Mortis, which is on YouTube, a cryptid TV show. It would seem that it has taken a shine to me, as any time I'm passing the woods, it is there stalking and watching. When I walk my dog will react to it, as sometimes it can be seen just out of the edge of the woods near the fields. Just weird, and wondered if anyone else has seen something like this. Just weird, and wondered if we have anyone who is an expert in sightings on Cannock Chase that could look into this. It seems strange that numerous family members have also noticed some figure stalking them and watching them in the woods, even at times in the brightly lit sections.
Every summer, my friends and I used to go camping in southern Illinois on an isolated huge plot of land with beautiful locations. If you live near the area, you've probably heard of it. It really is a good camp with a lot of great people. It isn't cheap and it has a long history, but for privacy reasons, I won't name it. Throughout the camp, there are various units that host different genders and ages. At one of these units, one night a couple of years back, all 5 cabins burned down mysteriously. But luckily, no one was in them at the time. There were no signs of arson and no records of lightning or thunder or any other kind of weather-related things. They were confused about how it happened. They brushed it off, but clearly some people were weirded out. One thing I need to mention is this land has Native American roots. Centuries ago, a group of pastors from Europe came to settle here, and they were all killed by the natives, except for 2. The deaths were painful, such as a tomahawk to the head or being lit on fire. Through the years, things have happened in that camp that made some adults genuinely afraid, but they rationalize it away. Let me tell you what frightened me. One night, most of the campers were sleeping, and I was too, until I heard something, which was strange because I was born with a hearing defect, so I have to wear hearing aids. Without them, I can't hear well. I put them in and I listened, and it sounded like footsteps. Everyone knows that feeling when something isn't right. Yet my idiot self called out, "Hello," despite that feeling of dread. The footsteps then started in my direction. All of the cabins are on stilts and they're connected by a big catwalk. There were about 6 of them in that unit. I got worried and hid under my sleeping bag. It sounded like normal adult footsteps, but they were off, walking at a very slow pace. They stopped right outside my cabin, and it was quiet for a while. I looked up for a second, and I saw an outline of something taller than any adult in the camp, maybe 7 feet tall. I hid my head in the pillow, and after a few long minutes, it started slowly walking away, off the catwalk and down to the gravel road that connects the various parts of the camp together. And this is where I honestly felt fearful. For the next half hour, it just drug its feet over the gravel road, constantly, and it would stop just to turn around and do it all again. It would start getting closer, and then it would drag away. It was horrible. Then it groaned, which was even more terrifying. It was obviously taking great pleasure in scaring me, and that confirmed to me that this was something with intelligence, or at least not a normal animal. The moan sounded similar to a human, but rough. I could feel it in the air. It was so weird. The worst part was the screaming howl that came from the uninhabited part of the camp. I really can't explain that, but it definitely did not sound human. That thing that was dragging up the road stopped suddenly, then I could hear it bolt off in the other direction. I was young, and this was so off-putting. This probably wasn't as dangerous and scary as other stories, but 2 of the takeaways is that this happened in southern Illinois, near the Kentucky border, and it took place in an area with a history of unsettling events.
I live in Mexico. My city is very old. The majority of its inhabitants actually came from out of state or other towns nearby. Now the place is thriving. It is in fact the 2nd largest city in the state, but it wasn't always this way. 50 years ago, from my mother's recollection, there weren't many houses there besides theirs, and they said that children at the time preferred not to go out at night because things were said to happen. When I was little, I remember that I woke up once in the middle of the night to pee, to an outhouse that was a short distance away. After doing what I needed to do, I shook my head and at that very moment saw a creature, like a big cat. It was dark, solitary, and it alarmed me, as I'd never seen something like that before or since. I got very scared. The scary thing was that my aunt once told me one of her personal experiences of a neighbor who passed away when she saw one of these large cats that transformed after it followed her into the house. You see, this story was given more credit, as in Mexico we believe in the Nahuatl, which is a witch that it can allegedly transform into an animal, and are known for taking and eating the young. That, at my age, was particularly terrifying. But one of the elements of the story that my aunt told to me was that before the lady who was followed by the animal passed away, in the morning she had actually broken a glass, which was said to be a precursor to her demise. The only thing I recalled the night before was hearing a particular bird song which frightened me. This convinced me in that moment that I also was doomed, and so ran inside as quickly as I could, closed the door, and that was that. I don't think anything else happened, but it scared the life out of me for years to come. I don't think it was an ordinary cat, and I know for sure it wasn't my imagination.
I'm a female, and when I was around 14, my mom, dad, 2 brothers and 2 sisters traveled to the north side of town to Apex Park in South Australia. This is a huge park with tennis courts and a little nature preserve behind it, with a river that runs into a little lake. We went there to meet some extended family for lunch. At that age, I struggled heavily with depression, so I enjoyed wandering off with my headphones in to explore and get lost in my imagination. I had walked across the boardwalk that gets you across the river and into the nature park part of the area. It was a long dirt crossroad with a huge dead tree in the middle, surrounded by scrub. I was wandering down the track listening to music when a tall, well-dressed man in a blue shirt stepped out, completely clean, from the swampy marsh area. I stopped and took my headphones out to tell him that he scared me. He apologized before smiling and walking off in the opposite direction. I thought nothing of it at first, but was kind of suspicious about how clean he was. I continued down the path until I got to the bridge for the lake. I figured if I went too far, I'd be out of reach of my family, and that guy was still in the back of my mind, so I turned around and began to go back towards my family. Because of the dirt, I was walking at an angle, so I could see ahead of me before whatever or whoever was ahead of me could see me. Standing in front of the dead crossroad tree was the guy in the blue shirt, talking to a really dirty-looking short guy and pointing in my direction. Alarm bells went off in my head, so I hid behind a tree and I watched as the short guy wandered down the trail next to the one that I had gone down. He was looking around in the bushes and stuff, and I scanned the area for the blue shirt guy, but he was just gone, nowhere to be seen. So I ducked around a tree and crouched down as I ran past the trail opening and sped walked to the dead tree. I stood there for a moment scanning again for the guy in the blue shirt, but I didn't see him. There weren't even shoe prints in the mud by the base of the tree where they had been standing. The other side of the crossroad led to some homes. These houses had huge 6-foot to 7-foot tall wooden fences, and behind them, the trees were so pretty. So instead of running back to my family like I should have, I wandered over about 5 feet away from the fences and took photos. This is where the crawler comes into play. I'm not sure if this creature was a crawler, but after extensive scouring of the internet, this is what matches most closely. Everything went silent. No bugs, no birds, no horses from the neighboring paddocks. Even the wind stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a screen door opening and shutting, and then silence again for 10 seconds. I continued taking photos until I saw something pale gray out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see two huge hands with long skinny fingers fold over the top of the fence, and slowly a head of a hairless, skinny, tall creature peek over the top and look at me. It only peeked over half its head, but it looked like it didn't have a nose, and its eyes were huge and glowing a white-yellow color. It stared at me as I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever, but in reality was probably 5 or 10 seconds. Then, its head snapped to the side, and I turned my head to see what it was looking at, and the guy in the blue shirt was about 4 feet away, hiding in the brush. I turned and walked quickly towards the crossroads, glancing down at my phone for 3 seconds before looking back to see him charging towards me, not running exactly, but obviously striding fast in an effort to catch up with me. I stayed calm and sped walk across the boardwalk. I didn't run because he was bigger than me, and if I let on that I knew he was after me and started to run, I was afraid he would have caught me or pushed me in the lake. I only started sprinting when I could see my family and I heard him behind me start to run. After I got back to my family, my aunt told me that the guy in the blue shirt had been circling us all since we got there, and he had been watching me in particular for at least 2 hours before this happened. To this day, I've never been able to explain what I saw over the fence or what it was. I just know that if it hadn't been for it, I never would have seen that guy walking towards me, and I don't think I'd have been able to get away.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's videos, and of course a huge thank you to Daughter of Darkness for joining me. It really was a lot of fun. Cryptid stories are great. I think we're running out of material for woods and stuff. I mean, it has been a month, so it's sort of understandable. So yeah, I think we're going to move back to our regular programming now. But it's been fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you enjoyed Daughter of Darkness's narrations, please be sure to check out her channel, link in the description. She's quite new, and yeah, I think I really like her voice. And if you do, then please show her some love. It really is appreciated within this community. So I was a bit annoyed yesterday because my compilation video was instantly demonetized, and well, there's this new system where you have to review the video and say if it's demonetizable, I suppose, if it's worth being monetized or not, depending on what's in it. And the 3 videos that it was made up of were all fine. YouTube never had a problem with them. But the moment I published that, apparently there's something wrong. And the thing is, I don't know, because I don't feel like any of those stories were particularly bad. So there you go. It was a bit annoying. And that's why there was no video on Sunday, because I was just trying to see how I could fix it. But there is no way. And I think if you remember from a few weeks ago, maybe last week, I uploaded a very dark story, 4-minute story, because YouTube were going to penalize me, and they were starting to demonetize every video if I didn't do a video that I said had to be demonetized, so that then they trust me, because it's a really weird system. I have to upload something that I know is bad so that they can agree with me, for them to trust me to upload something that's good. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, to be honest. But it is what it is. Let's just hope they figure it out. I hope this video wasn't targeted. There is literally nothing bad in this video, other than creepy stuff, which, is fine under their guidelines. Sorry for the rant. I really hope you guys liked today's video. I'll probably put up a poll for tomorrow, because it's not going to be a woodsy topic. Alright then, so for now, a huge thank you as always to my lovely patrons whose names are on screen, and I'm going to bid ye all good night. Stay awesome, and and I'll see you in the next one.